You know what I mean when I say the godfather, right? Well, get ready to hear about the godmother of cocaine. She is Griselda Blanco, was a 69-year-old mother of four, seen here in one of her many mugshots.
If she was not one of the most prolific traffickers in the Miami.
In the sweltering heat of Cartagena, Colombia on February 15, 1943, a future drug queen was born. Griselda Blanco entered the world destined to become one of the most notorious figures in the history of drug trafficking. Griselda's early years were far from idyllic. Born to an unmarried mother, Ana Lucia Restrepo, young Griselda grew up in abject poverty. When she was just 3 years old, her mother moved the family to Medellín, a city that would later become synonymous with drug cartels. Life in the slums of Medellín was harsh, and little Griselda learned early on that survival often meant breaking the rules. By the tender age of 11, she was already dipping her toes into the world of crime. As a preteen, Griselda allegedly committed her first murder. The story goes that she kidnapped a 10-year-old boy from a wealthy neighborhood, and when his family couldn't pay the ransom, she shot the child in cold blood. It was a chilling preview of the violence that would define her adult life. At 14, Griselda ran away from home to escape her mother's abusive boyfriend. Most runaways might end up working odd jobs to survive, but not our Griselda. She turned to pickpocketing and prostitution, honing the street smarts that would serve her well in her future criminal career. It was during this time that Griselda met her first husband, Carlos Trujillo. He was a small-time forger, and together they had 3 sons. But domestic bliss wasn't in the cards for Griselda. By her early 20s, she had divorced Trujillo and was ready for bigger things. In the late 1960s, Griselda met and married her second husband, Alberto Bravo. This union would prove to be a turning point in her life, introducing her to the lucrative world of drug trafficking. As the 1970s dawned, Griselda Blanco was a woman transformed. The hardships of her youth had forged her into someone tough, cunning, and utterly ruthless. She had experienced poverty and abuse and was determined to never be vulnerable again. Little did the world know that this tough-as-nails Colombian woman would soon become the cocaine godmother.
She was there before Pablo Escobar on a much larger scale. Pablo Escobar was stealing cars when she was already trafficking 3,400 pounds of cocaine in the 70s and 80s.
Leaving a trail of white powder and blood across 2 continents. Griselda Blanco was about to embark on a journey that would take her from the streets of Medellín to the top of the Miami drug trade, and ultimately to infamy. The 1970s marked Griselda Blanco's entry into the high-stakes world of drug trafficking. Together with her second husband, Alberto Bravo, she began her ascent in the cocaine trade, a business that would make her infamous. Griselda and Alberto started small, smuggling cocaine from Colombia to New York. Their method was ingenious in its simplicity. They used cocaine-filled lingerie. It wasn't exactly Victoria's Secret, but it sure was Colombia's secret. As their operation grew, so did Griselda's ambition. She wasn't content with being a small-time smuggler. No, Griselda had her eyes set on the crown. She wanted to be the queen of cocaine. By the mid-1970s, Griselda and Alberto had built a sizable drug empire. They were living large, with mansions, fancy cars, and more cocaine than they knew what to do with. But for Griselda, it wasn't enough. In 1975, sensing an opportunity, Griselda made a bold move. She packed up her operation and relocated to Miami, Florida. It was a savvy business decision. Miami was quickly becoming the cocaine capital of America. Miami in the late 1970s was like the Wild West, only with more neon and fewer horses. The cocaine trade was exploding, and Griselda was determined to be at the center of it all. She quickly established herself as a major player, earning the nicknames La Madrina, the Godmother, and the Black Widow. The latter was due to her habit of eliminating husbands and lovers who were no longer useful to her. Talk about a tough breakup. Griselda's business model was simple but effective. Move massive amounts of cocaine into the US and eliminate anyone who got in her way. She was ruthless, innovative, and utterly fearless. One of Griselda's most notorious innovations was the use of motorcycle assassins for drive-by shootings. This tactic allowed for quick hits and easy getaways in Miami's often congested streets. It was a game changer in the underworld of drug-related violence. As the 1970s drew to a close, Griselda's empire was expanding rapidly. At the height of her power, she was smuggling about 3,400 pounds of cocaine into the US every month. That's more powder than you'd find in a clown college makeup room. But with great power came great paranoia. Griselda became increasingly erratic and violent. She was known for her extravagant parties, where cocaine flowed like water and armed guards kept a watchful eye. It was like a twisted version of The Great Gatsby, where instead of green lights, everyone was chasing white lines. By 1980, Griselda Blanco was at the top of her game. She was one of the wealthiest and most feared drug lords in the world. She had money, power, and enough enemies to fill a small country. However, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. The Miami drug war was heating up, law enforcement was starting to crack down, and Griselda's violent tactics were making her more enemies than friends. As the new decade began, Griselda Blanco seemed unstoppable, but beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. The stage was set for one of the bloodiest chapters in the history of the American drug trade, with Griselda Blanco right at the center of it all. The cocaine godmother was riding high, but little did she know she was about to enter the most violent and tumultuous period of her criminal career. The 1980s were going to be a wild ride, and Griselda was holding on tight, with one hand on her empire and the other on the trigger. The 1980s dawned, and with it came the peak of Griselda Blanco's power and notoriety. Miami was awash in cocaine, and Griselda was at the heart of it all, orchestrating a drug empire that was as violent as it was profitable. The Miami of the early 1980s was dubbed the cocaine cowboys era, and Griselda was the baddest cowgirl of them all. Drug-related violence was skyrocketing, and Griselda was leading the charge with a brutality that shocked even hardened criminals. Griselda's violence wasn't just business, it was her brand. She was known for her shoot first, ask questions never style of enforcement. Rivals, associates who fell out of favor, and even innocent bystanders all fell victim to her wrath. One of Griselda's most infamous acts occurred in 1982. Allegedly, she ordered the murder of a 2-year-old boy in a drive-by shooting. The target was the boy's father, a former enforcer for Griselda who had stolen from her. This act of brutality shocked even the most hardened members of the drug underworld, but the violence didn't stop there. Griselda was involved in countless murders, many of which she allegedly ordered personally. Her fearsome reputation earned her yet another nickname, the Black Widow of Cocaine. Griselda's personal life was just as chaotic as her professional one. In 1983, her third husband, Dario Sepulveda, fled to Colombia with their son, Michael Corleone Blanco. Yes, she really named her son after the character from The Godfather. Subtlety was not Griselda's strong suit. Griselda's response to this personal slight was typically violent. She allegedly had Dario assassinated and brought Michael back to Miami. It was a stark reminder that in Griselda's world, no one was safe, not even family. As Griselda's empire grew, so did her eccentricities. She threw lavish parties where the cocaine flowed freely and was rumored to have a solid gold submachine gun. Her love for the Godfather extended beyond her son's name. She reportedly modeled her own behavior after the fictional Corleone family. But Griselda's reign of terror wasn't without its challenges. Rival drug lords were constantly trying to muscle in on her territory, and the law was always one step behind her. One of her most notorious feuds was with the Ochoa brothers, fellow Colombian drug traffickers. The dispute with the Ochoas allegedly started over a $1.8 million drug shipment. What began as a business disagreement quickly escalated into all-out war. The streets of Miami became a battlefield, with Griselda's crew facing off against the Ochoa's men in bloody shootouts. As the bodies piled up, law enforcement began to take serious notice. The DEA, FBI, and Miami-Dade Police Department formed a joint task force aimed at bringing down Griselda and her organization. The net was starting to close around the cocaine godmother. But Griselda wasn't going down without a fight. She employed an army of lawyers, bribed officials, and wasn't above threatening or eliminating witnesses. She was like a real-life supervillain, always one step ahead of the good guys. However, even Griselda couldn't outrun the law forever. In February 1985, she was arrested in Irvine, California. DEA agents who had been tailing her for months finally caught up with her in a shopping mall. But true to form, Griselda's arrest wasn't the end of her story. While awaiting trial, she continued to run her empire from behind bars. She was like a real-life version of Orange is the New Black, only with less heartwarming character development and more cocaine smuggling. In a twist that would make even the writers of telenovelas roll their eyes, Griselda managed to continue her violent ways even from prison. She allegedly ordered several hits on inmates and guards who crossed her. As the 1980s drew to a close, Griselda Blanco's empire was crumbling. The law was closing in, her enemies were gaining ground, and her own paranoia was reaching new heights. The cocaine godmother was about to face her day of reckoning. But even as her empire fell, Griselda Blanco had left an indelible mark on the history of organized crime. She had revolutionized the drug trade, left a trail of bodies in her wake, and become one of the most feared and notorious criminals of the 20th century. The stage was set for the final chapter in the bloody saga of Griselda Blanco. The question on everyone's mind was, how would the reign of the cocaine godmother finally end? The 1990s marked the beginning of the end for Griselda Blanco's cocaine empire. Her arrest in 1985 had been just the start of her legal troubles, and now the full weight of the American justice system was bearing down on her. In 1994, Griselda faced murder charges in Miami. Prosecutors accused her of ordering 3 murders in 1982, including the shooting of the 2-year-old boy. It seemed the cocaine godmother's bloody past had finally caught up with her. But Griselda had one last trick up her sleeve. In a move that shocked many, she struck a plea deal with prosecutors. In exchange for pleading guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder, she received a relatively light sentence of 20 years in prison. The plea deal was controversial. Many felt that Griselda had gotten off easy, considering the scale of her crimes. But for the once mighty drug queen, it was the beginning of the end. Griselda served her time in a federal prison in California. Even behind bars, stories of her fearsome reputation continued to circulate. Fellow inmates gave her a wide berth, wary of crossing the woman who had once ruled Miami's drug trade with an iron fist. In 2004, after serving 19 years, Griselda was released from prison and deported to Colombia. The cocaine godmother, now in her 60s, returned to her homeland as a legend of the drug trade. Back in Medellín, Griselda kept a low profile. The drug trade had changed dramatically since her heyday. The massive cartels of the 1980s had been replaced by smaller, more discreet operations. Griselda, it seemed, was a relic of a bygone era. But old habits die hard. There were rumors that Griselda was trying to re-establish herself in the drug trade, albeit on a much smaller scale. Whether these rumors were true or not, they spoke to the enduring mystique of the cocaine godmother. On September 3, 2012, Griselda Blanco's violent life came to a fittingly violent end. As she was leaving a butcher shop in Medellín, a man on a motorcycle pulled up and shot her twice in the head. It was a method of assassination that Griselda herself had pioneered decades earlier. Griselda Blanco was 69 years old when she died. Her death marked the end of an era in the history of the drug trade. She had outlived many of her contemporaries and enemies, only to fall victim to the very type of violence she had unleashed on Miami decades earlier. In the years since her death, Griselda Blanco's legend has only grown. Books have been written about her, documentaries have explored her life, and Hollywood has turned her story into fodder for movies and TV shows. Today, Griselda Blanco is remembered as one of the most notorious figures in the history of the drug trade. She was a pioneer in many ways, a female kingpin in a male-dominated world, an innovator in the methods of drug smuggling and distribution, and a harbinger of the extreme violence that would come to characterize the cocaine wars. Her legacy is a complex one. To some, she's a symbol of female empowerment, a woman who beat men at their own game in a ruthless male-dominated industry. To others, she's a cautionary tale, a reminder of the human cost of the drug trade and the self-destructive nature of a life of crime. But whatever one's view of Griselda Blanco, there's no denying the impact she had on the world of organized crime. The cocaine godmother may be gone, but her shadow still looms large over the history of the drug trade. And so ends the tale of Griselda Blanco, the girl from the Medellín slums who became the queen of cocaine. Her rise was meteoric, her reign was bloody, and her fall was spectacular.